Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Super-Fanta-Fi. This being a show where I talk about TV shows of the supernatural, fantasy, and/or science fictional genre. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Magicians. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, let's start off with Alice's side of the story in this episode, because obviously she's around Hamish, and Hamish is pissed because she moved all that equipment that was basically keeping the plants alive, but obviously she's trying to figure out, alright, so how do we deal with the, changing circumstances considering the moon? She's pissed at us. I guess there's no easy solution around fixing that, so I guess you kind of have to, kind of adjust to that. But how do you adjust to a circumstance that's always constantly changing because the moon's pissed at you, But nevertheless, what ends up it being interesting is that the episode actually diverts away from that issue and goes to something else that was actually set up at the beginning of the season, and that's that page that Quentin had. That Alice found, and basically Hamish kind of recognizes like a plant on it. He has a friend named Raylan to help hook him, who would know more about it. But you have Penny being like, nope, because a guy was banned, because he does like a lot of multiverse traveling and he could be contagious. But the fact of the matter is, Alice is like, well, the fact of the matter is we could, kind of work around this. Because obviously for Penny, it's like, why is it so important? She'll be figuring out a way to make it so we can cast again. But for Alice, she says this was from that page she found from Quentin. And so obviously it hits Penny because obviously it's like, they weren't together for long. But obviously, he knows, he felt, Quentin dying. It hit him in his own way. But also he knows how much it meant to Alice. Like he knows that, much like Julia, Alice is grieving in her own way, so he wants to help, whatever way he can. So kind of, brings Raylan in, gives him the test and everything. Turns out he's okay. Secretly, he's not. But he seems to know more about this page. But then it turns out he's actually infected with a fungus. He actually dies when Alice... I guess at that moment when Alice attacked him, I guess whatever left of him was there because it's basically like this fungus basically combined with him. So I guess whatever was left of him ended up dying. So they end up locking him up. And, you have Penny being like, I should have just listened to my own instincts. And then there's students nearby, but they're infected. And it's like they kind of basically reference zombies. It immediately made me think, the moment they started running, I'm like, oh, this is straight up some The Last of Us. The reason why I use that specifically because The Last of Us is legitimately fungi. And that's what this thing is. It's a fungus that basically infects you. So it's like, obviously, The Last of Us in that universe, that's how zombieism works. And that one is a fungus infection. So it was kind of interesting. They're trying to fight against it. They go to the one person that can help them, Fogg, who kind of chastises Penny for not being smarter about it. Because basically Raylan's someone that bounced from different multiverses. So who's to say he didn't pick something up in a different universe that we wouldn't know what to test for? So it's like, you're Jadine, you're supposed to be smarter than all of that. But obviously Fogg slipped and gave them the lead they needed to figuring out the situation. And I love him being like, oh, I'm going to get out of here. And I'm going to turn you into lobsters and I'm going to eat you. And Penny's just like, okay, and just closes the door. I'm interested to see what ends up happening with this whole Fogg, 17 storyline, But nevertheless, they were able. I really like that too because magic's wonky. Alice can't use her magic to kind of make herself kind of disappear. But she's sneaking around. She's like, yeah, basically let me use my skills from basically being unnoticed because of high school. And I'm like, oh, it's helpful in this case, but it's actually like super depressing and sad that you had to say that. And she's actually really good at like ducking behind the books, even going in between the bookshelves and everything. So they test it out, but immediately what happens? Penny gets poisoned, possessed. But then it's a really interesting thing because there's actually bonding between Hamish and Alice because Hamish was like, this is going to get you killed. Like, is this what Quentin would want? And then obviously Alice kind of snaps back because like, shut up. Basically, it's like, you don't know Quentin, so don't even say his name. But Hamish ends up bringing the fact up that plant that he was so protective of earlier in the episode. It's something important to his wife who passed away 5 years ago. So he knows exactly what Alice is going through when it comes to like, you want to cherish that one thing that's left, of that person you love. You want to hold on to something of them, and for him, it's like this plant is that particular thing because it's something she took care of because it needs very specific conditions to exist. And basically, his wife took care of it without using magic. It was such a prideful thing that she did. So he wanted to kind of continue that because it was like a part of her still alive. And even though Alice kind of had her closure, it's still not 100% done. Like, because I think, she's still definitely in that grieving process. And even the way Hamish was talking about it, he's like, even now, even after 5 years, it's still there. but at least, it can kind of grow from inside of you. And things are still going to be kind of shitty even after a year, but give it time that basically, it's not going to be the easiest thing, but it will be easier, that almost like you can find your way forward through everything, like I said, it's just this process of grief. So what was interesting though is ultimately their solution on how to beat this thing. Basically, it's interesting because it is a fungus, so it can grow as much as it wants to, but it is also a consciousness as well. So that's why it didn't fully spread across the school, because it has to limit how much it spreads. Because once you spread your consciousness too thin, because basically it needs to basically house like a certain amount of its own consciousness before it can possess a person's body. So basically there was a fraction of it still with Raylan's body. So basically they gathered it up and sprayed it a little bit with every student. It's kind of effed up because now every student has a little bit of this thing with it. So it's like, it's not technically dead. It's going to be living in every host forever. But the fact of the matter is, it's just not going to have enough of its consciousness there, because its consciousness is basically spread so thin. A recent example would be like, Rasputin in DC's Legends of Tomorrow. He's blown into so many pieces he can't repair himself and come back to life. So they got him spread as goop. So it's kind of like that, as each individual body being basically a central jar to house a percentage of the creature. So, but it was interesting when it kind of broke down and explained like what this whole thing was about. Apparently that page is kind of like the right ways to kind of tend something known as the world seed. And the creature was saying like, yeah, it could be something that you could even, it's like a thing of potential, and that can even be used to make a world. But then now that he was kind of slowly coming back, Penny kind of brought up the fact is that this thing was running from something known as the couple. And it's like not a couple, the specific couple. And I thought that was interesting, but we'll get to that in a second. And it's like whoever they were, there's something so dangerous that this thing was scared. And so now they know, Alice now has this page that they're hunting down about this seed and everything. So it's like, okay, so what's that all going to be about? Because that was also the thing too, because like you had Penny being like, why does Quentin have something like that? And Alice is like, yeah, why is that? So, and that's the thing, like, when did Quentin get something like that? That's what doesn't make any sense. Because I feel like we would have remembered him getting something like that. So was it sometime before he ended up dying he got it? Was it some point before he, went to the afterlife? Like, while he was in the underworld, like, with Penny 40? Like, was it around that time that he, like, I feel like that had to be something he did before he died. Might not even been left by Quentin. It might have been left by someone else kind of pulling the strings along to kind of make this all happen. We'll kind of have to figure out. But they mentioned the couple. My mind immediately went like Adam and Eve. I mean, we're dealing with a seed. I think tree. So I was thinking like maybe Adam and Eve. I could be 100% wrong, but that's why I was like, could that be what that is? But then I was thinking like, well, maybe we're dealing with like the old gods, because we've come across obviously like the children of the gods. We've come across Liberians who became gods, but we've never actually met the actual old gods themselves. So I'm like, could we be talking about like the old gods, like the OGs, like the original mom and pop of all gods type of situation, essentially like the alpha and the omega? Like, could that be what this is signifying, or is it something else entirely? That's where my mindset is. We'll kind of have to, ultimately wait and see where all that ends up going. But I'm curious to kind of find this whole world seed situation out. I mean, because it doesn't seem like it isn't just about making a world. It seems like the seed could also have potential to do other stuff too, which I'm like, you don't think that it could be something like, well, because they got the closure they needed, but they're like, you don't think they're going to try and use that for like a Quentin situation? I don't know. I don't know what to kind of make of that. We'll ultimately have to, but wait and see on that. But obviously, this is just things kind of, on Earth, now it's like dealing with everything on Fillory. So there's a whole situation of, well, now they're coming up with a plan of like, well, we got to deal with the Dark King. But it's like, they bring up an interesting point that I hadn't really thought about. Right. The Dark King's been ruling for 300 years. So he has some form of immortality, proving that he is like some powerful magician. So it's like, and I love Josh, because like the bar mitzvah that got mentioned last episode, he's like, because of that, he's like, can't we find like a more pleasant way of dethroning him? But obviously Margot's like, now we kind of got to go for it, because it's like he's making all these takers and stuff like that to perpetuate like, his rule and everything. And so obviously it comes down to like, well, the only way they're going to get close to killing him is it has to be Elliot, because Elliot's the one that's close to him. But really quick, I love Josh being like, the cook, the maid, the soldier, and, well, the Julia. And it's like Julia kind of gives a look like, yeah, because that's kind of only the descriptor she kind of has in this situation, because this is her kind of first, step in all of this. But the fact of the matter is, obviously, Elliot's not too happy about this situation, because he brings up the fact that he's like, why does every person I like, why does it always end up with them dying? And it's like, yeah, it happened with Mike, it happened with Quentin, and now it's potentially going to happen with Seb. So it's like, you can understand why he's reluctant. So it's like, Charlton's like, well, then tell them how you feel. He's like, well, the fact of the matter is they're still going to make me do it anyway. But it's like, Charlton's like, no, let them know, how you feel about this whole thing before it becomes too late. Like, you end up doing something you regret. Obviously, Margot's there to be like, yo, what's up? But obviously, Charlton's like, why don't you tell her at the very least? Like, that's kind of your best bud. And he goes, so for him, it's a thing of it's like, I kind of like him and I don't want to kind of do this. And Margot's like, I totally get it. But there, the one solution to dealing with something like this. And Elliot was kind of like, what was it? Something and pining and a whole bunch of fantasy sex. And she's like, no, you bang it out. Which Elliot's like, yeah, but banging it out with someone that you're eventually going to have to kill. It's like, no one should have to do that more than once in your life. And it's like, right. Because let's not forget, he literally had to do that with Mike in season 1. It's like they had a relationship, they were banging it out. And then Elliot had to be the one to put him down. It's like, yeah, you shouldn't have to be the one to do that multiple times in your own life. So, but, Margot was like, don't worry, because you're my friend. I'll promise, you find his weakness, I'll be the one to do it. He's like, how are you going to do it? It's like, don't worry about it. I'll find a way to do it. So Elliot tried getting close to Seb, but obviously he kind of pushed, there's this intimate moment, because even he's trying to talk to Seb. It's like, walk away from the throne. But for him, it's like, I can't, the weight of the crown. Because that's the thing. It's like, you're creating a situation, but why are you staying? Why do you feel the need to? Why do you feel this almost responsibility, yet you're creating the problem in the first place? Even him being like, oh, the children were taken, if only I showed up. So it's part of me is are you just psychotic and you're keeping all the pretenses of it? You're just kind of I think maybe it's because in his mind, it's if I set the evil free, as long as I can stop the takers, then it's okay. But the fact is, at moments he couldn't. So it's I don't know. It seems like maybe whatever the condition is that made him put him in a position where he takes the throne must mean that he has to go. Maybe this is a condition of his ruling that he has to create. Maybe it's this perpetual cycle. I don't know. But Elliot tried to get close to him, but obviously Seb kind of pushes him away. And now it turns into a whole thing of okay, so how do we deal with this? I love Finn was raising her hand. And Elliot's like, you don't have to raise your hand, just spit it out about it. Well, because basically they end up figuring out, because of the tattoo on his chest and what Seb had said, it's oh, he's connected to this conduit. And it's basically it's kind of potentially the power behind all of this. In this particular case, it's a tree. So the whole point is find that tree, chop it down. Seb becomes immortal again, and you can kill him. All the while this is going down, Finn and Julia, because Julia was like, yeah, I haven't been feeling well. So do you have something I could just pee on where it could tell me? And it's a rabbit. We don't know if she actually had to pee on it, whether she just had to grab the rabbit. Because you usually get the rabbits to do what you need them to, because once again, the whole secret is cigarettes. Is kind of I think that's what we learned last season, that their whole shtick is cigarettes. You get them enough cigarettes, they'll kind of do whatever you need them to do. But the fact of the matter, it turns out she's pregnant, which is oh, so it's pennies. That's interesting considering the complicated situation you're in. But obviously she's oh, I want to deal with this in my own time, so let's not talk to anyone about it. And Finn's don't worry, you don't have to worry about it. I keep your secret. I mean, I've kept Elliot's secret for years, that he's actually afraid of butterflies and shit. She's don't worry, I'm not going to spill your secret like I just did Elliot. So I love that. I was oh, that's actually kind of adorable that you're kind of afraid of butterflies. That comes up later on, but still. But what's interesting is about this whole situation of, I think, because for Julia, it's having a kid, it kind of dictates so much of your life. You kind of you're kind of limited of what you can do potentially. Obviously, it's the pros and cons to the thing, especially if it's not something she planned for. So for her, she's in the process of trying to figure herself out, just because of the whole Quentin thing. She has magic again. She wants to, figure out herself, and now having a baby on top of that kind of dictates more the path your life's supposed to go down. Needs to go down, not necessarily what you 100% want it to. And obviously, Julia at one point kind of realizes like the hard like, oh, like I'm having this conversation with Finn who lost her child, which it could always be the situation of Julia ends up giving the child to Finn, but then Penny should have a say in it, obviously being the dad and everything. But for Julia, she wants to take a step back because let's not forget, last time she got pregnant, it was under very terrible circumstances. It was a very complicated circumstance, you know. And so it kind of would, it adds an element of like PTSD to her, like having that, because obviously like she had that baby taken out of her, and what happened? Oh, she ended up getting a piece of her soul scraped away. So even potentially an abortion would, you know, have its own lane of PTSD for her because of that too. So it's like, she just needs to take time to figure it out. Sadly, because of the time of frame where they are on Fillory, basically her pregnancy is going to be a shorter period. It's not going to be a full 9 months. She actually has less time. The more time she stays in Fillory, the faster her pregnancy is going to go down. So it's like, that's definitely going to be an interesting angle to it. So, along with all of that, you have Margot and Elliot switching bodies because it's like, all right, we need to kind of jump on this now. We go Freaky Friday, as you know, Elliot kind of references, because Margot's saying like, this way we get around the fact is you don't have to kill the king, which obviously, you know, Elliot's like, technically I'm still killing the king because it's still my hands getting covered in blood. But the problem is, which is like kind of bullshit magic of like, yeah, but you can't tell anyone you switch bodies because if you did, then we get stuck like this forever. I'm like, well, that's kind of a little middle finger asterisk that's put beside the spell. So that's interesting. So Margot is kicking it with Josh. I love that whole bit earlier in the episode where she was turning down Josh's snacks because she knew it was an excuse for him to actually talk about everything. And then it's like, oh, but can't we eat? And she's like, no, it's just all a trap and stuff like that. So both of them are kind of dealing with each other's things. Also, Margot gets introduced to Charlton. It's like, well, what kind of name? Who gave you that name? And it's like, Charlton's like a family name. I never really liked it much, but it's like, okay. So it's like, yeah, he's kind of a remnant of the monster being inside of me and stuff like that. So... but basically both of them basically having to deal with everyone's baggage, like Margot having to pretend to be Elliot and acting a little different, and the king is like, wait, what's up? And it's like, oh, because basically Finn and Julia ended up creating a situation like a curse or sleeping spell to basically make it so that both Elliot and the Dark King would have to work together to break the spell. But Margot's doing kind of a terrible job, and even Charlton like being kind of like the backseat, backseat Ellioting Margot, basically telling her like, oh, you're kind of doing a shitty job at being Elliot, because basically it's like Margot's going at it from her approach, but Charlton's like, approach it like Elliot would. Elliot's very vulnerable. It's like obviously what the Dark King went through losing someone. Obviously Elliot can sympathize, and it kind of ended up working. Even Charlton's like, oh, look at you kind of going through. But at the end of the day, Margot actually started feeling bad for the Dark King because it's a situation of like all that he's lost, but at the same time having to bear the weight of the crown that no one can understand. Both Elliot and Margot can super understand because both were high king at one point in time, so it's not the easiest thing, and you kind of don't get the gratitude, and it's just like there's just complicated things that come about with the whole wearing the crown. And obviously Margot actually kind of feels bad. It's like, I need to kill him, but now I feel bad. And it's so interesting because she was kind of like, you know, not as sympathetic to Elliot about the whole thing. I mean, granted, she's being a friend of like, you know, I'll do this for you, but now it's like, oh, I kind of realize like why Elliot kind of the way he feels about this whole situation. The guy actually kind of like, oh, he's kind of a good guy, which even Charlton's like, yeah, he's a good guy. He seems like a decent enough person, but he's still, you know, summoning a taker, so he's still kind of evil king. At the same time, Josh and Margot, I love Elliot being like, holy crap, it's butterflies. And he's like, oh, because you don't know where they're going to go and stuff like that. I wonder, is it the whole thing of like, is it a fear of like, you don't know if they're going to fly into your ear and get stuck like some bugs apparently can, you know, they do that. So I wonder, is it some fear like that Elliot has, or does it run deeper? But obviously Josh doing what Josh does keeps, you know, it's like, sadly, Elliot accepted the snack and ate it. And then immediately Josh was like, oh, let's talk about our feelings and stuff like that. And it's like, oh, you fell into the trap that Margot told you to avoid, not to accept the snacks, because it was a gateway into him talking about his feelings, which Margot, you know, Elliot kind of navigates it a little bit by being like, hey, like, for like, the fact of the matter is, I haven't forgiven I'm working on forgiving myself, and then we'll get to you forgiving me. So we'll kind of let things kind of be status quo till then. So till then, let's go move on. But Josh is like, who are you and what are you? Definitely not Margot. You know, being open about your feelings and stuff like that. It's super not Margot, which is like, well, to be fair, that is like Super, not Margot. So Elliot kind of messed up in that front, and obviously Josh doesn't want to help out and everything, which I guess it makes sense because he doesn't know who this Margot is, because it could be someone working with the Dark King. But at the same time, it's like, considering the circumstances, not really the best time for you to be putting your feelings first, considering like we're trying to assassinate and topple a king, so it's kind of worst timing. But sadly, you know, Elliot kind of got tired of Josh's persistence, and it's like, you got with someone who's going to put, you know, other things before you. The fact of the matter is, I don't feel bad about what I did, and if I had to, I would do it again. Which obviously, you know, saddened Josh. For like, yeah, now that sounds like the real Margot. Which is like, I might feel differently tomorrow, and he's like, no, you won't. So it's like, they chopped down a tree, but even when the time came, Margot couldn't bring herself to kill the Dark King. It actually took Julia coming up to kind of land the final blow. And by the time the two switched back, they kind of ruined, you know, it's like they kind of ruined their own relationships, but also ended up ruining the relationship with each other as a byproduct of them already ruining their own relationships. In particular, Margot was like, no, it's not your fault. You literally had to deal with the aftermath of something I set in motion. Because I didn't deal with the Josh situation ahead of time, you kind of had to deal with it. So it's not even your fault things play out this way. It's kind of more on me. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see how they kind of piece things going forward, because it's like, despite, you know, the relationships thing being a complicated mess for both of them, at the very least, at least in Elliot's case, he's like, you know, at the very least, things don't always work out with, you know, the guys he likes and stuff like that. It's like, but you'll find someone. But the fact is, at the very least, things work out on a friendship, you know, portion of things. So that was pretty neat. Until we get the ending where it's like, oh no, the Dark King is super alive. So it's like, either like that tree was only a portion of what kind of made him what he was. Maybe that conduit was connected to something else, not necessarily his immortality. Maybe his immortality isn't even necessarily a blessing. Maybe it's a curse. Like, even if maybe the tree was only like a surface conduit, and maybe there's something that runs even deeper. Or maybe it's just that tree had some significance to him, so it being cut down had no bearings. Maybe, well, no, because like the thing went green, so the thing that's supposed to signify like the conduit was cut. So it's like, why is he still alive? Like, maybe it's a situation where it has to be kind of simultaneous. You need to kill the conduit and him at the same time, because if one's still kind of alive at that time, it's able to replenish. Maybe not. I'm interested to ultimately see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode, kind of diving into like understanding the Dark King's past, of like how you went from like how you landed this position of the whole Takers thing. Like I said, once again, have you been doing this the entire time, or were the Takers actually an evil at first? Like I said, is this something that a role that he was cast in? He kind of, like I said, he feels like he can't walk away, like the weight of the crown and everything, but it's still kind of like, what is that weight necessarily? Why are you keeping the crown? Like I said, we'll ultimately have to wait and see. But really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.